Hey, welcome back to Stir. This is our second interview, and today we have Kayleen Schreiber and Kourtney Kavanis. And we're so excited, ladies, for you to join us because you have created a really amazing resource called Easy to Be Angry, a collection of thoughts and ideas for overcoming the easy urge to be irritable and angry. And it can be found at anger.kayleenscriber.com. Welcome, Kayleen and Kourtney.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Ladies, can you tell us a little bit about your backgrounds for those who maybe don't know you as well or whatever? What led you down this path?
Yeah, it's kind of funny because we are twins, obviously, but we went very different paths in college. We kind of knew we wanted to go to different colleges. I went into English and journalism. She went into neuroscience. So I knew I wanted to do writing and editing from sometime in high school. I knew that that was kind of what I wanted to do. And then I went into more of like marketing and content strategy, and that's what I do now. So I still do a lot of writing and editing, but also kind of the strategy behind what stories brands are telling customers and how to explain complex technology to different audiences. So I work for a marketing agency, and we mainly work with big tech companies, and so we work on content. But Kayleen actually eventually went into content as well. If you want to share that.
In high school, I knew I got really passionate about learning about the brain and neuroscience. So for college, I did a major in neuroscience, and then I went on to a PhD in neuroscience. And during the PhD, I was thinking about what sort of career and lifestyle I wanted. And I still loved the brain and everything nerdy, but I knew I also wanted kids and I wanted the flexibility to be able to stay home with them at least for a certain number of years. And so at the same time, I started being interested in the sort of disconnect between what I saw in the scientific community and the scientific method and how that was being communicated to people that don't have a science background. And so I got more passionate about that communication side of explaining complicated science topics to different audiences. And so then I got into data visualization and infographics and things like that. And so more on the visual, a little bit more artistic side, but that's kind of where we merged, is that now we're both sort of working to explain complicated topics to specific audiences. And yeah.
Through content. Yeah. And we're both able to work remotely, which is a really big blessing for sure. So,
And
yeah.
are you
So,
located in the same town as well?
Yeah, so we're both in Cincinnati. I never really thought that we'd get her out of California with Justin, honest, but we did it. It happened. So our
yep.
most of our family's here in Cincinnati now, and yeah, our kids get to grow up together. So it's
That is
pretty,
awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a really interesting partnership. Do you think that this is going to lead to more in the future?
Hopefully, yeah.
probably.
So every like big life stage for me, I've kind of felt the urge to write about different things, and I try to suppress the urge because it's a lot of work, but something usually has to come out. So like when I went to college and then when I got married and then now having children, having a child, it just something about the identity shift and all of the things that happen, and a lot of new things come up that you have to process and deal with. So that kind of, for whatever reason, drives me to write about it or create something about it. So I think that's a continual kind of life process. And then this one in particular was really nice that I got to do with Kayleen, to have all of that side, that we could do something even more creative and kind of a new format for it. So yes, hopefully more in
Yeah,
the
I
future.
think I think of myself as like not a creative person in the sense that I like make something out of nothing, but I really have a lot of ideas about like taking something and like making something more useful out of it, or like transforming it or curating it or those sort of things. So, yeah, I feel like if there's information, whether it's like data or like long form writing or things like that. Whenever I find something that's interesting, I want to do something with it. So yeah, we'll probably keep doing that.
So why anger? What brought you to this point specifically?
Yes, good question. It's not the most fun topic to talk about, but after, well, first when I got married, I never really thought of myself as like an anxious person per se, but I think I probably was, but I became a lot more aware of it when I got married, when it was like, okay, if something happens to this person or our relationship, like I would be totally destroyed. Like you just kind of realize that at some point, and there's a different kind of feeling about it than me on my own as an
Yeah.
adult, just living my life. Like, yeah, there were things that I cared about, but not kind of quite in the same way. And then that just ratcheted up even more when I had my daughter. So I have a 3.5-year-old now. And you kind of realize like, okay, cool. Now I'm just like constantly worried about stuff. Like that there was a lot more fear and just worry. And like I remember when she was first born, I was so afraid of just tripping while I was holding her. Like it was this weird mental, I'm like, I don't trip very often. Like it's
There's a
not.
whole lot of hormones flowing
I was
that
just like,
change your
what
experience
is
too.
happening?
But yeah.
So all of these different triggers for me, I felt like brought up more irritability and more anger as well. And when I started talking to other people and just seeing other people and the ladies that I knew, and couples that I knew who had young kids as well, they all seemed to kind of feel that way also, or most of them felt like, wow, I'm feeling a lot more irritable, a lot more triggered than I used to. And I kind of wanted to explore that because I felt like there's there's things that we deal with as Christians, and there's tools, and we have all these concepts in the Bible, but when you have something new like that that just kind of, it's an external thing that triggers something new that you're like, now I have to deal with this, and I didn't really have to deal with it in the same way before, and I didn't think I was this kind of person or whatever. That I think is a lot harder to deal with because, we grew up in our church and have tried to walk the Christian walk like our whole lives. And then when something comes like that out of the blue, where you're like, I didn't think I was an angry person, but now I'm getting angry pretty frequently, and it's hard to be the mom that I want to be or be the wife that I want to be ideally. Then it's like, okay, what have other people said about this? How do other people deal with this? What tools can we gather to help us, and help each other and learn about this to move forward. So
And I think God does put us in situations that kind of expose things that we were able to sort of cover, at least from most people that we interact with, fine. And then you get into a situation where you're like, oh, I thought I was in control, but I don't have control in the way that I thought. And you
yeah.
have to get some new strategies for those situations, as you go through life.
Yeah, exactly. Because there's a lot all the scriptures of, don't have fear, don't have a spirit of fear, like we're supposed to be loving and compassionate and patient and kind and all those things. And then I think emotions are just really hard to deal with because they can be so quick and so powerful. And so to me, I had heard a lot of sermons and messages about not being angry. But a lot of them to me didn't get to the crux of the how. Like, okay, I know I don't want to be this way, but how? How do I do it beyond just more prayer, and kind of the normal things that you would suggest? And I think to me the Bible is not, it's not a how-to book. To me, it's a collection of stories and poetry and history that make you look at yourself and examine yourself as you meditate on it, but it's not, to me, really an instruction book. And so the principles there are what we tried to base all of our information on. But I think gathering tools that are more of the kind of, okay, if you're in this situation, here's what you do type of information that are based on the biblical principles is kind of what we tried to do with the project.
And I really appreciate your vulnerability in sharing that process for yourself. That's a really big deal. And I think it is a much broader experience than I think we often acknowledge to ourselves,
Mhm.
right? So, talking about that, I know one element of your project was that you assembled a team of, was it mostly women,
Mhm.
to kind of give you some feedback? Tell me how you went about. So, you have this idea. What were your steps? And then I want to hear about this team.
Yeah, I think, yeah, that was something that really helped us and helped me feel a little bit more confident in what we were doing because as a writer, you can write about what you know and what is helpful for you, but I wanted it to be helpful for a wide audience as well and get different people's perspectives because different people's personalities, I think, have a lot to do with their emotional expression and their triggers. And there's a lot of variety in how we each kind of feel emotionally and deal with those emotions. So um, we we gathered a group of ladies from our church area here locally, and I I wanted it to be a big enough group to get variety of perspectives, but also a small enough group that we could really talk and like have some vulnerable conversations. And then we wanted some older generational folks and younger. I think they were all moms by that point, but some younger moms and some older moms. Because one thing that kind of was a starting point as well for this is culturally there's a term mom rage that's out there and it's kind of well known, a little bit well known, and I thought that was interesting that that's like even something that the broader society is talking about. And so a lot of it happens, I think, because moms are put in such like pressure situations with their kids, and it's just all day, every day that you're dealing with these things that your triggers and your energy for having patience really gets worn out.
And a lot of people don't
Yeah.
have a
Have
support
support. Yeah.
system. Yeah,
Mhm.
like we used to have, we're more segregated to just our own nuclear family.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so much more gets put on the mom.
So there's a lot that moms are dealing with in particular. I tried to expand that a little bit in the project because I think dads and just spouses, even if you don't have kids, like everybody deals with this at some level. But we got together a group of moms. We wanted to, at first, just kind of have some vulnerable conversations about, what people are dealing with. Do you feel this way as well? Do you get angered more than you would like to? Do you feel like you can kind of put on a good front out here or at church or at your job, but then when you come home, it's like a different personality comes out that you don't like as much, and
Or just
that's
little bursts of like,
yeah, your filters come down and then you kind of explode. And yeah, a lot of people were dealing with that, but it was really, really helpful to have that group perspective, to get some ideas and share feedback. And then one thing that was really helpful that we did was an anger tracker. So we all, for 2 weeks, tried to write down every time that we got angry and what the trigger was, anything that helped, like the time of day, how we tried to address it, all of that
who was
stuff.
involved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that was really interesting because we were trying to look at, okay, are there things in common? Like, are there things that everybody like
Looking for
gets more
trends.
angry at the end of the day, which kind of turned out to be true.
Mhm.
Or when you're hungry, or just a lot of different things.
It was five moms who
Yeah.
completed the 2 weeks. But even like each individually, like just doing the anger tracker, like each of us kind of noticed things that we hadn't noticed before
Yeah.
just by having to write down all the times. And one of the
Yeah.
moms even said she thought there were way fewer anger episodes in those 2 weeks, and she was like analyzing like, is it because I like don't
I'm
like,
self-conscious.
yeah, like that I don't
Yeah.
want to write down another thing or like what it was. It was pretty interesting.
Yeah, and we found a few commonalities, but there were also just a
Yeah.
lot of different triggers, a lot of different ways that you would handle it or the ways that you would respond to the anger. So that was really helpful to kind of inform in an anecdotal way kind of what we were doing, as we started to put together the first draft.
And we really appreciate those ladies who are willing to do that because it was
Yeah.
super vulnerable. Like,
Yeah.
because you're sort of describing the situation like in their
Yeah.
homes and like spousal stuff. And so, yeah, we really appreciated that they were willing to do that.
So you got all of that um, data back, and then where did you go from there?
Yeah, so that was one thing that we did. I feel like you did some other data.
Well, I looked at the data from the tracker while she was kind of taking the feedback from the
Yeah.
bigger group to put together the the rest of the content of the book. So, and we were sort of working together to say, like, I had some ideas of a few sort of data visualization type things that we could do based on the tracker and then where it would fit within the other
Yeah.
like resources and outline. And then we kind of went back and forth and we restructured the
Yeah.
thing a few times and because it was a lot
It was a
of
lot.
it.
Yeah.
How
And we
long
did,
did this project take
yeah,
you?
that's what I was gonna say. It took over a year of
Wow.
kind of
Oh,
working
yeah.
through things. We read a lot of different resources because that was one thing as well. Like a lot of stuff has already been written about anger and how to deal with it. And there's psychology and Christian biblical type stuff. And so I was trying to not just recreate everything, but really pull together from all these different resources anything that I thought was useful and more practical. Like, okay, how do I apply this? Does this help me understand something better? And then how do I apply that in my life? So it was a long process, but it
And
was, yeah,
we had a few people read drafts
yeah,
of the whole thing and give comments and that was really helpful too.
yeah, for sure.
I'm glad you brought up the resources and the research that you did because I was most impressed, I think, with the breadth of resources that you reviewed and then incorporated. I thought that was just amazing. So thank you for your efforts. It was really cool. Yeah.
Yeah, it was helpful to me because, there's people who are definitely more experts on emotions and psychology. I'm not a psychologist. There's people who have actually researched, how emotions function in the brain, what happens in your body, and then the things that actually work to regulate your emotions. So I wanted to make sure it was based on that and not just kind of how we felt about whatever.
Right. Well, I liked your list of recommendations at the end. It's a great spot if this was a good fit for you, then you could take it deeper by going to these other resources
Right.
too. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, because there's a lot of great stuff out there.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, next question. How has this project changed you?
Yes. Good question. Um, yeah, there's a couple of things for me. I think overall it has actually been very helpful, which was encouraging to me that it's not just, another article that you write that's out there, but something that kind of changed how I think about different things. So one was really going through God's anger and God's character and his emotional life was very influential to me. I think in our church culture, sometimes there can be more of an attitude or just somehow we get across that emotions are bad and you need to think through things logically and not and I think those things come from a good place. It's like you don't want to be led astray by your emotions or just be led by whatever you're feeling in the moment. But sometimes we take that maybe to the extreme of all emotions are bad and going through the biblical examples where God does get angry, but he's also very patient and that the what he's known for the most, even in the Old Testament, is being slow to anger. So he does have the full range of emotional expression, but he knows how to control it. He knows how to let the emotions be a driving force for good and not for evil. So to me, thinking about that and that really we have to determine, are my emotions in this moment aligned with something godly or aligned with, human nature or something that's not godly, and really evaluating that in the moment rather than kind of the dichotomy that I usually hear of mind versus heart. I don't think it really is mind versus heart. I think it's our emotions are powerful. They're there for a reason. Sometimes they can be driven by not so great things, but sometimes they can be driven by really good things. You know, our compassion drives us to help our children and to be kind to them and to teach them in a loving way. So it's a lot more nuanced, I think, than that mind versus heart that you usually hear. So that's one thing.
Mhm. I think the sort of the impetus for why you did it was that it's so easy to, as a parent, I think, to like downplay your sort of weaknesses, and just at the same time you're like getting on your kids for any time they speak meanly to someone else, or are selfish or like hit someone or whatever. But then for us it's really easy to be like, oh, like, whoops, that was a little rougher than I needed to be, or like um snippier, but you just kind of move on and you don't deal with it. So to like put the look at ourselves, and for me, like, make sure that the way that I'm acting, even in the little moments, is the way that I want to be an example for my kids. And so first, just to kind of like be a little bit more like have a little higher bar for um a consistent way that I'm treating the kids, but then also just strategies, because like you said, if you can have all the hope to be a certain type of mom, but then when you're like in the moment, it's super hard to know what to do. And one thing that I think I've since this tried to do a lot more is like verbalize what I'm feeling with the kids. And you can even do it like in a loud voice, but be like, I'm getting frustrated, like telling the what's happening instead of like bossing or like belittling or anything like that. Just be like, this is making me really frustrated because you're doing, because this is happening, or I asked you to do this and it's not happening. Like, so like just talking more about what's going on internally for the kids instead of flipping to, I'm just putting in the car, like grabbing them and putting them in the car, or like yelling at them, or just being like,
Yeah, and that's such a good model for kids too, because you would rather have them say, "I'm very angry right now," than yell at someone and attack, the other person. And so modeling, yeah, thinking about what we're doing as a model for our children, I think is really helpful because they are going to do whatever we do. If we say something, they're gonna say it back to us at some
yeah, you
point.
can't teach them like you need to be doing this, but then they see you.
Right. You yelling and getting angry. Yeah, and I think just being aware of those tools that you can use your words, you can feel the emotion, but you can express anger without being mean and without disrespecting the other person, I think is a big key. It's not about pretending that you're not angry or never get angry or scared or something. It's about expressing it in a way that doesn't tear the other person down.
I really love that idea of modeling because this is what you're saying is kind of missing in a church culture that we're familiar with. Um, Sometimes that how to, and so to see that in action, I have yell prayed before in front of my children. God, please help me. And
Yeah.
it gives my children pause. I mean, it's not often. I've shared that with you before,
Mhm.
but I think it does help when they see this is the process, this is how you do it. And so I love that. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, because otherwise, how do they know? They only know what they see and what they see other people do. So I think we kind of forget that. You take it for granted. And when you see emotions that are not so lovely come out of your children, it's easy to just want to like squash that. But
Mhm.
but really teaching the skills for emotional regulation is something, we have to do our whole lives. So realizing that they struggle with it also is a big part
Well,
of it.
and I think a lot of times for adults or parents, like we maybe do the repair or the repentance, and they don't see it. Like they see,
Yeah.
an outburst or something, and then you go on with your day, and then later you may pray, but they don't see or hear
Yeah.
that. And and you don't go back to them maybe necessarily and rehash what happened. So I think sometimes we don't think about the pieces, what they see versus your whole relationship with God or your family or your husband might be different than the pieces that like small children especially are seeing.
Yeah, that's a great tool that we tried to include too, is that repair or like reconciliation and being very mindful of doing it with the people closest to you. Because sometimes I think you kind of maybe take it for granted that they're still gonna love you and be there, but they're the people closest to you. And so being very thoughtful about going back and saying, I should not have talked that way. I'm sorry that I got so upset. Here's what I'm going to do next time. That also is modeling, but it's also repairing the relationship and showing them that you can apologize, and that's what helps move the relationship forward. So.
I really appreciate you saying that because we're back to vulnerability, right? And that was when my children were young, that was one of my big things that we learned that our parents had not done super well, maybe, but that vulnerability of being willing to apologize, being willing to break down what went wrong and how you were going to fix it to restore. And I love the word repair in that also. Also, one of your components in your resource talked about how anger can be a mask for other emotions. And I found that super helpful. Is there anything you'd like to talk about that? I'm sorry, I'm throwing that in there.
Yeah, no, that's a really good one, I think, because it's fairly common to talk about that in psychology circles. My husband's a clinical counselor, and so that was kind of something that he had heard, but it might not be kind of widely known. And there's some people don't perfectly like agree on all of that, but I think it's helpful at least to just consider because anger is so fast and so strong, um, and it's actually easier to feel anger than some other emotions. It gives you adrenaline, it gives you
Mm.
energy, it gives you a feeling of power. So sometimes it's easy to go into that mode and just kind of live there, when in reality, what triggered it was I just got scared that my daughter was going to get hurt, or I feel guilty about this thing, but I don't want to feel guilty, so I'm going to lash out and be angry about towards this person. So there's other feelings that are actually less comfortable, even though I wouldn't say anger is comfortable, but it does give you kind of a feeling of power that some of those more vulnerable emotions, fear, sadness, grief, guilt, it can mask potentially. So just kind of asking yourself, even after the fact of like, did something happen right before the anger that is a different emotion that I need to really look at and process, or else you're just going to keep getting triggered because you're not really looking at the deeper issue. So
Yeah, I think one of the main things that moms get like most angry about is their kids being unsafe.
yeah,
And that's like a fear
yeah,
thing. So even just I think it's natural, but it's also could be like you're mad that they made you feel the
yeah,
fear. You're just like, I
Uh,
don't why do you like so
yeah,
unnecessary,
yeah,
whatever. So knowing that even if you're still feeling mad, but you can express it in a different way, and
right.
we usually do say, I don't want you to be hurt. I don't, but if you kind of analyze it a little bit more, then you're not just like lashing out. And
Yeah.
then they understand too, like, oh,
Where is this coming from?
yeah, this is what,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Wow, that's fascinating. Um, so I'm curious why you chose an online format for this book.
Yeah, I think so we knew that this was going to be a lot once I started writing a lot of words. And so more than like your typical blog post or per se. And then we just started thinking about different options for a little bit more interaction
Yeah.
because we do think that that's helpful as well. It's easy to read over things and then not really dig into it. So we wanted a little bit of something. So we put kind of discussion questions. There's a little bit of interactivity and going to the different sections. And that way you can kind of take a piece of it, pause if you need to think that over, and then move on to the next one. So just kind of guiding people a little bit more easily to not be overwhelmed by all this stuff.
Yeah.
I also liked it was colorful, it was engaging, like it was compelling. So that was really, really good. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes it easier to consume, hopefully, even though it's a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah.
Courtney did the red in there. I was like,
Yeah, I was like, it
wonderful.
needs to be bright colors because we're dealing with strong emotions.
I'm like, make people to feel angry calm while they're reading about anger.
Yeah.
This is a whole color theory.
So, what are your hopes? Well, have you had good feedback so far? And then what are your hopes moving forward?
Yeah, we have had some good feedback of people just relating to it and feeling like it's something relevant and needed to be addressed. So that was really encouraging. And we are trying to even get a little bit more interaction. We would love more feedback, more um, just kind of people trying out the different tools. So that's one thing that we're trying to do with her group that I think we'll talk about a little bit. But the feedback has been super positive, which is awesome.
But yeah, it'd be great to hear from more people who, even if you don't get through the whole thing, if you
Yeah.
there's something that you find that you resonate with, or something that isn't in there that should be.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's very cool to see it as kind of an ongoing work in progress, at least at some level. That's really cool. So the best way to provide feedback would be, is there a feedback button on the site? I can't recall.
Yeah, both of our emails are on there.
On the
Yeah.
last page, the resource page, there's contact info for us.
Mhm.
You can reach
Yeah,
out.
so you could reach out to us. And yeah, we do want to at least a little bit update this on an ongoing basis and potentially add a little bit more. There was a book I read right at the end that I want to add more from. There's always more. The
There's
book came in
always more.
2025, so I got it right away, and I was like, it was helpful. But yeah,
Yeah, we
we
did
would
add a
love
couple.
to have any feedback through that resources section.
Mhm.
Very cool. You did mention, I'm sorry, did you have another question?
Go ahead.
You did mention a group that you recently created for members of your church. So it's a limited group, but can you tell us more about that? It's about parenting?
Yeah, we have a slightly bigger network of churches that usually are termed Church of God groups. And so we have relatively similar beliefs, Christian beliefs, and most of the groups, the congregations are spread out through the United States and internationally, and a lot of them are small. And so I really wanted to create a space or a platform where people with similar beliefs who are all thinking about this parenting stage to be able to come together and share resources, share feedback, questions, challenges, encouragement, just kind of have a place to connect, because I felt like we sort of had this community, but we weren't really utilizing it, especially for parents, and especially in this specific culture with social media and smartphones and technology and AI and sort of all these things that might not be like talked about from in sermons at church, even if parenting is talked about, and so that we can sort of discuss some of these things. And it is linked at the end in the resources page as well. This group is. But we have a space it's called the Grove, the parenting group, where people can talk about the anger resource. And we're hoping to kind of keep the conversation going and like have people maybe do some challenges, weekly challenges or things like that, where people can try different strategies and then discuss what worked and what didn't.
Like an anger tracker, for instance.
If people are willing to be vulnerable.
I know, I'm not sure.
This could be a great tool for research.
Yes, yeah.
That's really cool. And just to clarify, you guys aren't dealing only with parents of small children. You have wonderful resources for you. I've seen some great discussions there about teenagers. I got some great resources that were recommended about stuff for the computer for keeping your kids safe online that other people have found very helpful. So it sounds like it's really going to be a dynamic group that will.
Yeah,
I'm hoping the other piece, what I would love is that it can be even like an intergenerational wisdom sharing. So parents with moms and dads of young kids, of older kids, but also grandparents and even teachers. So anyone really that's thinking or has thought about parenting issues from a Christian perspective, that we can kind of share, if parents of older kids have gone through things, that they can then pass that down to the younger parents, whatever.
It sounds like you're creating the support system that you were referring to earlier that we found, in this day and age, it doesn't exist. We don't have communal like raising of children. We don't have multiple generations usually living in the same household. And it seems like the Grove is kind of filling that need to an extent.
Yeah, I hope that it can do a little bit. In Cincinnati, we're blessed with a larger congregation, so we can, have face-to-face conversations with parents, like-minded parents. But so many congregations, there's one or two families with kids, and that's it. So yeah, I would love for it to be at least somewhat of a help and a connection, and like I'm not the only one going through this right now.
Exactly.
So what I'm hearing here is that you guys have taken on two massive projects in the past several years and brought them to fruition. Way to go. That's a big deal.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's been a process, but it's been really enjoyable and helped us grow. So
If you're passionate about it, it doesn't feel so much like work most of the time.
Is there anything else that you would like to mention to our viewers that we have not covered yet?
I think just kind of an encouragement of, we're all working on stuff and all struggling in different areas. And society can sometimes go the way of normalizing, mom rage or different things because there are reasons for it. There are reasons why we're struggling. But as Christians, it's our job to do our best to move forward and to grow and to become more like Christ. And so finding ways to do that in whatever way you can is kind of our goal, and to help each other to do that and to encourage each other on that road is kind of what we're trying to do with this project.
Thank you both so much for being with us today. Again, the resource can be found at anger.kayleenschreiber.com, anger.kayleen, and it's schreiber.com.
And the Grove resource is on the resource page at Anger. Excellent. Ladies, thank you very, very much for your time. And I think we're done. Thank you.
Happiness.
Thank you. Bye.